When you argue with a fool, you're like a man trying to teach a fish how to climb a tree. You both end up frustrated, and the fish still swims away. But there's a far wiser way to deal with such madness. We live in a world overflowing with words. Everyone wants to be right. Everyone wants to win. Yet no one stops to ask, what exactly are we trying to win? For if you win an argument but lose your peace, you've gained nothing of real value. The fool, the true fool, is not simply someone ignorant or uninformed. No, ignorance is innocent. The fool is the one who believes he already knows. He clings to his beliefs like a drowning man clutching a piece of driftwood. And when you try to take it away, he'll fight you, not because he's evil, but because that piece of wood is his identity. So when you argue with him, you're not fighting over facts. You're fighting over his sense of self. And that, my friends, is a battle no one can win. Think of it this way. If you pour water into a cup that is already full, what happens? It spills over. No matter how pure the water, the cup cannot receive it. The mind of the fool is just like that, full, closed, and noisy. When you speak truth into such a mind, the truth simply spills out. So what should one do? How do we deal with the fool without becoming foolish ourselves? The secret lies not in confrontation, but in understanding. The wise man listens, observes, and sees through the madness, but he does not step into it. You see, arguing with a fool is like dancing with a storm. You may start with balance and intention, but soon the wind takes over. You begin to shout, defend, justify, and slowly you become swept into the same chaos you hope to avoid. This is why the sages of old, Lao Tzu, the Buddha, the mystics, always taught silence as the highest reply. Silence does not mean agreement. It means transcendence. It says, I see you, I understand you, but I do not need to fight you. Silence is not weakness, it is mastery. But silence alone is not enough. One must also know how to direct energy. When a fool attacks you with words, with mockery, with misunderstanding, it is tempting to strike back, to correct him, to prove your intelligence. But that is precisely how the fool traps you. He drags you into his level of vibration. And once you're there, you can't win, because he has home advantage. He lives in that chaos. He feeds on reaction. The wise man, however, shifts the entire game. He does not react, he responds. And his response is often not words, but action. For example, if a fool calls you weak, you don't argue that you're strong. You simply live with quiet strength. If he mocks your peace, you do not preach about calmness. You remain calm. In this way, you mirror wisdom, not noise. The fool then finds nothing to hold on to, because you have denied him the conflict he feeds on. And it's beautiful, really, because when you refuse to argue, you are no longer in the same play. You've stepped off the stage entirely, and the fool is left speaking to the empty air. The fool is not always out there. Sometimes the fool is within you. Yes, inside the mind that insists, I must be right. That voice that needs to win. That ego that burns when others misunderstand you. That, too, is a fool. To truly never argue with a fool, you must stop arguing with yourself. The moment you can let your own thoughts flow without judgment, the outer fools lose their power. For you cannot be disturbed by what you have already understood within yourself. In Zen, there's a saying, the tighter you hold the rope, the more the knot tightens. And that's exactly what happens in an argument. Both people pull harder, neither realizing that the only way to undo the knot is to let go. So the next time you feel the urge to correct someone, to make them see, to make them understand, pause. take a breath. Ask yourself, am I speaking to enlighten or am I speaking to be seen? Because one comes from love and the other from fear. One leads to clarity, the other to endless debate. When you move through life this way, you begin to see the fools not as enemies, but as mirrors. They reflect the parts of you still attached, still reactive. Each foolish encounter becomes a gentle lesson, saying, this is where you still take things personally. And isn't that the true gift? To use every irritation as a mirror for awareness? Then, even the fool becomes your teacher. Not because he is wise, but because he reveals your remaining illusions. In this way, you no longer despise the fool. You thank him quietly and walk on. So, what do you do instead of arguing? You stay still. You stay clear. You practice presence. You act from understanding, not reaction. You embody the very wisdom the fool cannot yet see, because wisdom is not about changing others. It's about not letting others change you. The fool argues to prove something. The wise person listens to understand something. And the greatest understanding of all is this: the fool and the wise are not two separate beings, but two states of the same consciousness. And in knowing that, the argument ends. Life is not a debate hall, it's a dance. And in a dance, there is no right or wrong step, only rhythm. When you argue, you lose rhythm. When you listen, when you observe, you find yourself moving in harmony with what is. That's where wisdom lives, not in proving, not in persuading, but in perceiving. To deal with fools is to learn the art of dancing lightly, to smile where others shout, to see the absurdity of it all, and to laugh gently, for laughter is the sound of awakening. I don't mean mockery. True laughter is compassionate. It comes from seeing the cosmic joke that we are all pretending to know, while the universe itself is laughing through us. So when the fool argues, you might even thank him silently, for he shows you the comedy of human certainty. And perhaps that's what makes the wise man so calm. He's seen through the play. He knows that every fool believes himself to be wise, and every wise man knows himself to be a fool. The difference is awareness, not opinion. Fools often become louder. They sense the absence of your energy, and it unsettles them. They demand a response. They crave the heat of your attention. Do not give it to them, because attention is power, and you decide where to place it. Instead of feeding their chaos, feed your stillness. That is your greatest strength. The fool cannot understand stillness, for his world thrives on reaction. But your silence, your refusal to play his game, becomes a mirror so clear that it unsettles his illusion. It's like standing by a pond. Throw a stone, and the ripples disturb the reflection. But let the water rest, and soon it reflects everything perfectly. The trees, the sky, even the clouds drifting above. So too with your mind. When you stop throwing stones of argument and defense, your mind becomes still enough to reflect truth itself. And in that stillness, understanding blooms naturally. You no longer need to convince anyone. For truth, like light, does not argue with the dark. It simply shines, and by its very presence, reveals. People often ask me, Alan, but what if the fool is harming others? Shouldn't we speak up? Of course. Silence is not passivity. You can act without anger. You can correct without contempt. The key is to respond from clarity, not ego. If you see a man spreading poison, you don't wrestle him in the mud. You take away the poison, and you wash your hands clean. That's what true action looks like. It's effective because it's not personal. It's simply the natural movement of awareness, precise, compassionate, and free of the need to win. They say, Alan, how do we deal with people who refuse to understand? The politicians, the parents, the skeptics. And I always tell them, Stop trying to make people understand. Instead, be the understanding. You cannot open a closed fist by force, but warmth, patience, and love can make it open by itself. That's the paradox of wisdom. What you resist persists, but what you allow transforms. To never argue with a fool is to trust that time and truth do the teaching. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. Not every comment deserves your reply. Not every noise deserves your music. And yet, you can always remain kind, because kindness is not agreement, it's grace. When you meet a fool with grace, you are not feeding his delusion. You're demonstrating another way of being. You're showing him, without words, that there is a peace beyond his chaos. Sometimes, that silent example plants a seed far deeper than any argument could ever reach. The world does not need more clever talkers. It needs silent watchers. It needs people who can stand in the storm and not lose their center. Because the more you argue, the more you become entangled in the world's drama, and the world loves to pull you in. But when you learn to stand still, truly still, you become like a mountain. The winds howl, but they cannot move you. The rain falls, but it only nourishes your roots. The fool comes and goes, and yet your peace remains untouched. Sometimes, the wisest response to a fool is simply to agree, not because he's right, but because you have no interest in proving him wrong. You nod, you smile, and you let him have the last word. And in that small act, you win the only game that matters, the game of inner freedom. For the wise do not measure victory by domination, but by detachment. They are free because they have nothing to defend. Their truth is not a possession, it's a presence. And this presence, once felt, begins to change everything around you. You no longer attract endless arguments because you no longer vibrate at that frequency. Fools sense that you cannot be baited, and they move on to find another target. This is not arrogance, it's simply evolution. Consciousness rises by refusing to descend into reaction. So when you choose peace over conflict, silence over shouting, awareness over ego, you are not avoiding the world, you are transforming it from the inside out. Next time you encounter the fool, the one who mocks, provokes, misunderstands, see him not as your opponent, but as your test. He's the fire that reveals how still your inner water truly is. And if you find yourself stirred, reactive, angry, good, that's your mirror. That's the universe saying, you still have something to see. Because every fool on your path is really an invitation to deepen your own awareness. And that, perhaps, is their greatest gift to you. In the end, all arguments are echoes of fear. The fool argues to protect his illusion. The wise remain silent because they no longer need illusion. The fool clings to belief. The wise rest in being. So the next time you feel drawn into a quarrel, remember, the urge to argue is simply the ego begging for attention. Smile at it. Breathe. Let it pass. For the truth needs no defender. It stands timeless, untouched by noise. It does not shout, because it has already won. And if ever you doubt this path, just look at nature. The ocean never argues with the storm. It absorbs it. The tree never argues with the wind. It's a rather funny thing. People often imagine that when they come to listen to a lecture, they must sit upright, alert, prepared to learn, as though they were attending a class in school. But what I want you to do tonight is something quite different. I'd like you to do nothing at all. That may sound odd, but it's the most important instruction I could give. Simply rest. Simply be here. Let the words come and go, like waves upon the shore. There's no need to cling to them, no need to remember them. If you drift into sleep, you have not missed a thing, because what is true has a way of remaining with you, whether you try to grasp it or not. So as you listen, perhaps lying down, perhaps sitting comfortably. Just imagine that we are together in a quiet room where there is no urgency. The world outside may hurry, but in here there is only ease. There is nothing to solve, nothing to fix, nothing to achieve. Only this: listening, drifting, perhaps forgetting, and perhaps remembering in another way. And what is it we are remembering? Well, that is the curious part. For what I wish to share with you is not new knowledge, not a fact to be memorized, but something far simpler, the recognition of what you already are. Not what you should be, not what you will become, but what you have always been, though it is so near, so intimate, that we often overlook it. You see, a fish does not notice the water in which it swims. A bird hardly pauses to think of the air that carries it. And in just the same way, we seldom notice the ground of consciousness in which all experience appears. We take it for granted, and in taking it for granted, we overlook the very essence of our being. Consciousness is not a thing you can hold in your hand. It is not an object among other objects. It is the background, the field, the invisible stage upon which all the colors and shapes of life play their dance. Try, for a moment, to step outside of it, and you will find you cannot. For everything you attempt is already within it. Even the thought that asks, "What is consciousness?" arises in consciousness. Now, you might think that sounds terribly abstract, but it is not meant to be. Consider, instead, how the stars appear against the night sky. Their light would mean nothing without the darkness between them. Music would not exist without silence between the notes. Every form requires a background, and consciousness is the background of all. But here is the paradox. The background cannot be seen in the same way that figures can. It is too close, too constant, too obvious. It is like your own eyes, through which you see the world, but which you do not see directly. And so the question, what is consciousness, is rather like asking, what is it that looks? You can ask the question forever, and yet the answer eludes you. For the answer is the very asking itself. So let us not struggle to pin it down with a definition. Instead, let us notice how it appears in everything. The taste of your breath as it moves in and out, the weight of your body upon the bed, the faint hum of sound in the room, the flickering of thought that rises and falls like little waves. All of this is consciousness, not a thing separate from the world, but the world itself in its shimmering appearance. Now, you might say, but is not consciousness inside my head? Is it not produced by the brain? That is a very common idea, and in some ways a useful one. But pause for a moment. The brain itself, as you know it, is something you see in pictures, or touch in models, or imagine from diagrams. But every picture, every diagram, every idea arises in consciousness. So which came first? The brain that produces consciousness, or the consciousness in which the brain appears? It is a puzzle, like the chicken and the egg. Yet the truth may be simpler than either choice. Perhaps brain and consciousness, world and mind, inside and outside, are not separate things at all, but two sides of one process, like the crest and the trough of a wave. You cannot have one without the other. They appear together, they arise together, they vanish together. Think of weaving the warp and the weft. Alone, each is only a thread. Together, they form the cloth. In just the same way, what we call the material and what we call the mental are interwoven, inseparable. Consciousness is not floating in a void apart from matter, nor is it merely a byproduct of machinery. It is the very pattern, the ongoing dance of existence itself. And this is important for you listening now as you rest, because so often we think of ourselves as something inside the body, a little driver behind the eyes, piloting this complicated machine. But what if it is the other way round? What if the body is not your possession, but your expression? What if the world around you is not outside you at all, but is the larger body in which you live and move and have your being? Consider the leaf upon the tree. It is not separate from the tree, it is grown out of it. And the tree is not separate from the earth. It rises from the soil, drinks the rain, breathes the air. And the earth is not separate from the sun, nor the stars, nor the galaxy. Where, then, does one thing end and another begin? Look closely, and you will see there are no clear lines. All is continuous, one flowing pattern, like waves upon water. And so you, yes, you, listening now, are not a stranger dropped into this world. You are not an isolated fragment cast adrift. You are as natural as the clouds, as inseparable from the universe as the crest is from the trough. The very sense of being I, of being here and now, is not a prison, but a window through which the whole cosmos looks at itself. Now, let yourself feel that, not as an idea to grasp, but as a relaxation. There is no need to hold so tightly to the boundaries of the self. The world is holding you as the ocean holds its waves. Just as the wave cannot fall off the ocean, you cannot fall out of the universe. You may rise and fall, appear and disappear, but you are never apart. You are always the movement of the whole. And so, as you breathe, as you listen, perhaps as you drift towards sleep, remember, there is nothing to fear, nothing to prove, nothing to cling to. You are not a lonely actor upon the stage of life. You are the stage itself, the lights, the music, the whole performance. And when the curtain falls, it does not mean the play is ended forever. It only means another scene is about to begin. And so, as you lie here, listening, perhaps drifting between waking and sleep, I remind you again, you need not hold on to a single word. Let them pass as clouds pass across the sky. They are not instructions to follow, not problems to solve. Only sounds, rising and falling, like the tide upon the shore. Now, where were we? Ah, yes, this strange thing we call I. For most of us, it seems quite obvious. I am in here, and the world is out there. I look at it, I think about it, I act upon it. Yet if we look carefully, we begin to wonder, where exactly is this I? You may point to your head behind the eyes, but what you find there is not an I, but thoughts, sensations, images, all appearing in awareness. You may point to the chest, to the heart, but again what you find are feelings, pulses, movements in awareness. Where, then, is the one who claims ownership of these? Where is the self, apart from what arises? If you search for it, you will not find it. And if you stop searching, there it is as the very flow of searching itself. It is a trick of sorts, like trying to bite your own teeth. The self that says, I must find myself, is like fire trying to burn itself, or a sword trying to cut itself. The harder you try, the further away it slips. And so, the great discovery is that the self is not a thing to be found. It is the pattern of everything happening, body, thoughts, feelings, sounds, the whole world as it moves together. To say I am separate is like a wave insisting it does not belong to the ocean. But to feel I am the ocean waving here and now is to rest at last. Now, what does it mean to rest? It does not mean to stop moving. Even in stillness, the heart beats, the breath flows, thoughts ripple. Rest is not the absence of motion, but the absence of resistance. To rest is to let life be as it is, without pushing it away, without dragging it near. And here is the curious thing. The more you allow, the more you discover that life has been carrying you all along. Just as you do not pump your heart by conscious effort, just as you do not command each cell to renew itself, so the greater processes of the world move without your control. The sun rises, the earth turns, the stars burn, all without your permission, and you are part of that same unfolding. This is why, when you truly let go, you do not fall into chaos, you fall into harmony, for chaos is only the name we give when we do not see the pattern. Look at the clouds drifting across the sky. They have no straight lines, no sharp edges, yet there is a rhythm in their movement. Look at the waves on the sea, no two alike, and yet each belongs perfectly to the swell and the tide. Look even at your thoughts, jumbled, scattered, endless, and you may find that they too rise and fall in a rhythm beyond your control. And when you stop resisting, you can see it. Everything belongs. Everything has its place. Even confusion, even uncertainty, even fear, just as night belongs to day, just as silence belongs to sound, so every experience belongs to the great whole. Now, many people find this idea unsettling. They say, but surely if I do not control myself, if I do not discipline, plan, and strive, everything will fall apart. And yet, notice, when you sleep, you do not control. You surrender completely, and in that surrender, your body heals, your mind renews, your being is refreshed. If you had to control sleep, you would never succeed. It comes only when you let go. So perhaps life itself is like sleep in this way. The more you grasp at it, the more restless you become. The more you trust it, the more it carries you. Trust does not mean passivity, but a kind of cooperation, like dancing with a partner. You do not drag them across the floor, nor do you collapse in their arms. You move together, listening, responding, yielding, and guiding. This is the art the Chinese call Wu Wei, not forcing, not straining, but moving with the grain of things, as water flows with gravity, as roots sink into the soil. And in this way, you discover that effort is not absent, but it is effortless. Like breathing, like blinking, like laughter, it happens of itself, and in that spontaneity, it is free. So, as you drift further now, notice how the breath breathes itself. Notice how thoughts arrive without your command. Notice how the body settles as if guided by a deeper rhythm. All of this is the dance of life, carrying you whether you try or not. And the more you see this, the lighter the burden becomes. Now, let us think of another mystery time. For much of our anxiety comes from the sense of time slipping away, of moments lost forever, of futures uncertain and pasts irretrievable. We live caught between memory and anticipation, seldom pausing to rest in the present. And yet, the present is all there has ever been. Consider this: you cannot step into the past, you cannot step into the future. You can only recall or imagine them, and both recall and imagination happen now. The past is a story told in the present. The future is a vision drawn in the present. And the present itself, that is slippery, for the moment you try to grasp it, it is gone. But perhaps that is the secret. The present is not a point to be caught. It is a flowing like a melody. A melody is not one note held forever. It is the succession, the passing, the change that makes it beautiful. Try to freeze the song and you lose the music. Let it move and the music appears. So it is with life. The beauty lies not in clinging to one instant, but in the continuous flow. To resist change is to resist being alive. For all is change: the seasons, the tides, the breath, the heart, the thoughts that pass and pass. You yourself are not the same person you were yesterday, not even the same person you were a moment ago. And that is not a tragedy, it is the very condition of life. For to live is to change, and to change is to be renewed. Just as the forest must shed its leaves, Just as the moon must wax and wane, so we too must come and go, appear and disappear, die and be reborn, moment after moment. And if you can accept this, not merely as an idea, but as a felt reality, you will find peace. For you will see that death itself is not the enemy of life, but its partner, its shadow, its completion. When you fall asleep, you die a little death. The world vanishes, the self dissolves. And when you awaken, it is as if the world is born anew. And so perhaps the great death, the one we fear at the end, is only the same process on a larger scale, the self dissolving into the vastness, only to rise again in forms we cannot yet imagine. This is why, in many traditions, death is not seen as an end, but as a return, a homecoming, a renewal. And even if we do not know what lies beyond, we may trust that it belongs, just as night belongs with day, just as silence belongs with sound. So rest easy, knowing that nothing is ever truly lost. The wave returns to the sea, but the sea does not vanish. The leaf falls from the tree, but the tree lives on, and in time new leaves appear. The breath goes out, and the breath comes in. Always the cycle, always the renewal. And so, let yourself sink into this rhythm, as though you too were a wave returning to the ocean. You need not resist, you need not hold on, simply rest in the great flow and let it carry you home. We may begin to see, if we look deeply enough, that existence is not a machine grinding toward a purpose, nor a burden to be endured, but something more like a performance, a dance, a song, a play. For what is music, if not the purest example of life's way? When you listen to a melody, you do not hurry it to the end. The purpose of music is not the final chord. Were that so, the best symphony would be the one that ended instantly. No, the delight of music lies in the unfolding, the rise and fall, the tension and the release, the play between expectation and surprise. You allow it to move as it will, and in its movement lies the beauty. So too with life. If the purpose of living were only to arrive at some final goal, we would all rush to the end as quickly as possible. But the end of life is death, and if that were its sole purpose, the faster the better. Yet we instinctively resist that, because deep down, we know life is not a race to a finish. Life is the music itself, the dance, the play. Imagine the universe as a vast stage upon which every star, every creature, every moment is a part of the grand performance. You are not merely in the audience. You are on the stage as well, playing your role with every breath, every gesture. And though you may forget the script, though you may stumble over your lines, the play continues, and in its very improvisation lies the genius. For that is what existence is, improvisation. The universe did not begin with a carefully written plan, with blueprints laid out for every detail. It began, and it unfolds, like a jazz performance, each moment responding to the last, each note calling forth another, with no fixed destination but the joy of the flow itself. When you see this, you begin to relax into the play. You no longer demand that it conform to your private plot. You understand that your story is one thread in a vast tapestry, and the tapestry is more beautiful for its endless variety. There are tragedies and comedies, climaxes and pauses, dissonances and harmonies, and each has its place, for without contrast, no scene would shine. Consider how light is known only through darkness, how laughter is sweetest after tears, how reunion is precious only because of separation. The play requires both sides, and you are both sides. For you are not only the hero of your story, but also the background against which the hero moves. You are the stage, the scenery, the supporting cast, the hidden hand that guides the plot. And here is the curious discovery. The one who plays all the parts is you, though not the small you, who worries about tomorrow's tasks and yesterday's mistakes. Rather, the great self, the totality, the eternal actor who wears 1,000 masks. It is the cosmos playing hide and seek with itself, forgetting and remembering, concealing and revealing, over and over again. You see, it would be dreadfully boring to know everything at once, to have no surprises, no risks, no unknowns. So, the one becomes many, the infinite becomes finite, the eternal becomes temporary, in order to experience the thrill of discovery. Just as a child hides behind a curtain, knowing they will be found, so the universe hides itself in you, in me, in every form, to delight in the moment of revelation. This is why, if you feel lost, if you feel uncertain, it is not a mistake. It is part of the play. You are the cosmos, pretending to be uncertain, pretending to seek, so that the joy of finding can be felt. Were you never lost, you could never be found. Were you never confused, clarity would have no meaning. Think of a game of cards. If you could see all the hands, if you knew the outcome in advance, where would the thrill be? It is precisely the not knowing, the risk, the chance, that makes the game alive. And so the universe plays with itself, concealing the ending, leaving the next move uncertain, so that every moment is fresh, alive, real. Now, when you understand this, the heaviness begins to lift. You realize that you do not have to force life into seriousness at every turn. Of course, seriousness has its place, just as drama has its scenes. But beneath it all, the foundation is play. Even the gravest act, even the deepest sorrow, is woven into the larger dance, the rhythm of yin and yang, of rise and fall, of life and death. And if you can see that, you begin to smile, even in difficulty. Not the smile of denial, but the smile of recognition that the tragedy is part of the comedy, that the fall is part of the rise, that the loss is part of the renewal. You begin to sense that, in some deeper way, you are not a victim of the drama, but its author, and not just the author, but also the audience enjoying the show. For when you step back far enough, you see that everything balances, the mountains and the valleys, the stars and the void, the birth and the death. There is no one side without the other, no crest without the trough, no sound without silence. And so, to resist half of life is to resist the whole, to deny the pattern that makes it complete. It is like weaving again. The threads cross back and forth, dark and light, one way and the other, and only together do they form the cloth. If you were to pull out all the threads you disliked, there would be no fabric left. And so, the universe weaves with opposites, and we are each a strand in that endless loom. And perhaps the deepest realization is this: the play is never finished. The curtain falls, yes, but only to rise again. The actors bow, but only to return in new roles, new scenes, new worlds. For eternity is not endless time, but timelessness, the endless capacity of the present to appear in new forms. So here you are, playing your part, as real and as sincere as any role can be. And behind you, through you, as you, the eternal self delights in the performance, knowing that in the end, nothing is lost, nothing is wasted. Every joy, every sorrow, every moment is part of the great laughter, the cosmic dance. It is one thing to see the universe as play, as music, as dance, but another to carry that vision into the texture of daily life. For here we find ourselves faced with very human struggles, fear of loss, desire for certainty, the restless urge to control what we cannot. And so we ask, if all is play, why do I suffer? If life is a dance, why do my steps stumble? These are honest questions, and they deserve honest attention. First, let us look at fear. Fear is the shadow cast by uncertainty, the trembling that arises when we cannot predict what lies ahead. Yet look closely. When has the future ever been certain? Has it not always been unknown? And yet here you are, alive, breathing, carried from moment to moment through countless uncertainties. Fear is not a flaw, it is part of the play. It sharpens awareness, it quickens the pulse, it reminds us of our vulnerability. But when we see it for what it is, a ripple in the stream of consciousness, we need not be enslaved by it. We can let it rise and fall as clouds pass through the sky, without mistaking it for the whole. Next, desire. We spend much of our lives chasing after what we do not yet have, convinced that if only this or that were attained, then at last we would be whole. But consider, each desire fulfilled gives way to another. The horizon recedes, always just beyond reach. If satisfaction lay only in the future, it would never arrive. So perhaps desire too is part of the play. It is the reaching of the flame toward the fuel, the hunger that keeps the dance moving. But when we see it clearly, we no longer mistake it for salvation. We can enjoy it as one enjoys the thrill of a chase in a game without believing the prize will make us eternal. And then there is control. The sense that if only we could master ourselves, master others, master the world, all would be safe. But have you noticed, the more we tighten our grip, the more things slip through our fingers. The child clutches the butterfly, and it is crushed. The river is dammed, and it overflows elsewhere. Control is not wrong. It has its place. We must guide, we must shape, we must steer. But when control becomes obsession, it turns against itself. For life is too vast to be held in a single hand. It moves in ways beyond our prediction, beyond our design. And so, the art is not total control, but cooperation to row with the current rather than against it, to listen as much as to command. Now, when fear, desire, and control are seen in this way, they lose their weight. They do not vanish, they are threads in the pattern, but they are no longer mistaken for the whole fabric. You can let fear tremble without believing it defines you. You can let desire burn without chasing it endlessly. You can guide without the illusion of mastery. And in that space, something else appears. Acceptance. Not resignation, not defeat, but a quiet recognition that life, as it is enough. That even the struggle is part of the dance. Even the wound is part of the healing. Acceptance is not passive. It is the deepest activity of all, for it requires you to see clearly, to open fully, to allow without resistance. In acceptance, you discover a freedom greater than control, a peace deeper than certainty. And so, as the play unfolds, you find yourself smiling more easily, even at the ordinary. The taste of water, the sound of wind, the glance of a stranger, all shine with a quiet radiance. You begin to notice that life does not need to be extraordinary to be profound. It is profound simply because it island. For when you step back far enough, you see that everything balances. The mountains and the valleys, the stars and the void, the birth and the death. There is no one side without the other, no crest without the trough, no sound without silence. And so, to resist half of life is to resist the whole, to deny the pattern that makes it complete. It is like weaving a game. The threads cross back and forth, dark and light, one way and the other, and only together do they form the cloth. If you were to pull out all the threads you disliked, there would be no fabric left. And so, the universe weaves with opposites, and we are each a strand in that endless loom. And perhaps the deepest realization is this: the play is never finished. The curtain falls, yes, but only to rise again. The actors bow, but only to return in new roles, new scenes, new worlds. For eternity is not endless time, but timelessness. the endless capacity of the present to appear in new forms. So here you are, playing your part, as real and as sincere as any role can be. And behind you, through you, as you, the eternal self delights in the performance, knowing that in the end, nothing is lost, nothing is wasted. Every joy, every sorrow, every moment is part of the great laughter, the cosmic dance. It is one thing to see the universe as play, as music, as dance, but another to carry that vision into the texture of daily life. For here we find ourselves faced with very human struggles, fear of loss, desire for certainty, the restless urge to control what we cannot. And so we ask, if all is play, why do I suffer? If life is a dance, why do my steps stumble? These are honest questions, and they deserve honest attention. First, let us look at fear. Fear is the shadow cast by uncertainty, the trembling that arises when we cannot predict what lies ahead. Yet look closely. When has the future ever been certain? Has it not always been unknown? And yet here you are, alive, breathing, carried from moment to moment through countless uncertainties. Fear is not a flaw. It is part of the play. It sharpens awareness. It quickens the pulse. It reminds us of our vulnerability. But when we see it for what it is, a ripple in the stream of consciousness, we need not be enslaved by it. We can let it rise and fall as clouds pass through the sky without mistaking it for the whole. Next, desire. We spend much of our lives chasing after what we do not yet have, convinced that if only this or that were attained, then at last we would be whole. But consider, each desire fulfilled gives way to another. The horizon recedes, always just beyond reach. If satisfaction lay only in the future, it would never arrive. So perhaps desire too is part of the play. It is the reaching of the flame toward the fuel, the hunger that keeps the dance moving. But when we see it clearly, we no longer mistake it for salvation. We can enjoy it as one enjoys the thrill of a chase in a game without believing the prize will make us eternal. And then there is control, the sense that if only we could master ourselves, master others, master the world, all would be safe. But have you noticed? The more we tighten our grip, the more things slip through our fingers. The child clutches the butterfly, and it is crushed. The river is dammed, and it overflows elsewhere. Control is not wrong. It has its place. We must guide, we must shape, we must steer. But when control becomes obsession, it turns against itself. For life is too vast to be held in a single hand. It moves in ways beyond our prediction, beyond our design, and so the art is not total control, but cooperation, to row with the current rather than against it, to listen as much as to command. Now, when fear, desire, and control are seen in this way, they lose their weight, they do not vanish, they are threads in the pattern, but they are no longer mistaken for the whole fabric. You can let fear tremble without believing it defines you. You can let desire burn without chasing it endlessly. You can guide without the illusion of mastery. And in that space, something else appears, acceptance. Not resignation, not defeat, but a quiet recognition that life, as it is enough. That even the struggle is part of the dance. Even the wound is part of the healing. Acceptance is not passive. It is the deepest activity of all, for it requires you to see clearly, to open fully, to allow without resistance. In acceptance, you discover a freedom greater than control, a peace deeper than certainty. And so, as the play unfolds, you find yourself smiling more easily, even at the ordinary, the taste of water, the sound of wind, the glance of a stranger, all shine with a quiet radiance. You begin to notice that life does not need to be extraordinary to be profound. It is profound simply because it's simple. And perhaps, as you notice this, a new gratitude arises. Gratitude not for some special gift or sudden miracle, but for the sheer fact of being that there is something rather than nothing, that there is awareness, that there is this endless unfolding. Gratitude not clutched at, not forced, but flowing naturally, like water from a spring. In this gratitude, you see that even the end of things belongs. Just as the sunset is not less beautiful for ending the day, just as the last note completes the song, so endings are not errors, but fulfillments. And even death, feared as the final theft, is in truth the final gift, the gift of completion, the turning of the cycle, the clearing of the stage for new scenes to appear. And so we return, not to conclusions, but to the simplicity with which we began. The world is not to be solved, but to be experienced. You are not to be perfected, but to be lived. Consciousness is not to be captured, but to be noticed. And here, in this noticing, is peace. Peace that does not depend on circumstances, on achievements, on assurances. Peace that arises simply from seeing that all is as it is, and that what is enough. So let it be. Let the dance go on, with its laughter and its tears, its gains and its losses, its beginnings and its endings. For beneath it all, through it all, as it all, is the self that is never lost, never harmed, never absent. The self that plays all the roles, that wears all the masks, that sings all the songs. And that self which is you, which is me, which is all, is timeless, boundless, free. And so, as this reflection drifts toward its close, notice that nothing has really ended. The words have thinned, the thoughts have quieted, yet the awareness in which they appear remains. It is like a fire that has burned down to embers, not extinguished, but glowing quietly, giving warmth without flame. Life is like this, too. Every conversation, every season, every breath, all of them rise, shine for a time, and then settle back into the silence from which they came. But the silence is not emptiness. It is the source, the stillness that makes every sound possible, the background that holds every form. Perhaps you can sense it now, the way all things lean gently into rest. The body knows how to settle without instruction. The breath knows how to soften without command. The mind knows how to loosen its grip without force. Just as waves come to shore, then slip quietly back to sea, so all of this, too, returns to the vastness from which it came. There is no need to hold on, no need to resist. The lecture, like the day, like the life you are living, has its natural rhythm. And just as the sun dips below the horizon, not with a crash, but with a fading glow, so too do these words dissolve, leaving only the openness in which they first appeared. Rest in that openness. Trust it, as the earth trusts the night. For the same awareness that has carried you through these reflections carries you still, through waking and dreaming, through silence and sound, through beginning and ending alike. So let it all be. Let the thoughts pass, let the body soften, let the silence deepen. You are not separate from it, you are it. The watcher and the watched, the listener and the voice, the breath and the stillness between breaths. Here, there is nothing left to do, only the quiet recognition that all is well, and all has always been well, in the great unfolding of things. And now, as the final words fade like echoes in a canyon, may you rest easily, without effort, without question, carried by the same flow that has carried stars across the sky, rivers to the sea, and every heartbeat of your life to this very moment. Good night.
You see, most people go through life under the strange illusion that other people make them angry, that the world out there with its noise and nonsense somehow creeps inside and shakes the calm from within. But that's rather like blaming the mirror for the expression on your face. The truth is, nobody can bother you. They can only touch the part of you that is already disturbed. And the more you try to fight it, the more entangled you become in the very net you're trying to escape. Peace doesn't come by stiffening against life, but by realizing there's no one to stiffen. The waves rise and fall, and the ocean never minds. In the same way, anger, irritation, frustration, they come and go, but they are not you. To be unbothered is not to build a wall around yourself, but to see that there was never a separate self to defend in the first place. You see, when something happens, a disrespecting word, a sudden disappointment, a rude interruption, there's a tiny instant before you react. Most people never notice it. They leap from stimulus to response like a spark from flint, and then wonder why they feel burned. But in that small space, that fraction of a moment before the mind begins to chatter, lies your freedom. That's the gap where life gives you the chance to wake up, instead of merely react. The event itself is neutral. It has no meaning until you give it one. When someone calls you a fool, the insult only works if you believe in the fool they're talking to. If you don't, the words just vanish into thin air. So the game is not about controlling what happens, because that's impossible. It's about watching what happens within you and realizing, I don't have to pick that thought up. Anger only asks one thing of you, participation. The moment you stop playing, it dies of neglect. To react less is not weakness. It's the highest form of intelligence. It means you've remembered that you were never the puppet. One of the great sources of human misery is the quiet expectation that other people should know better. We spend an extraordinary amount of time waiting for the world to behave sensibly, as if everyone else secretly agreed to follow our rulebook. But of course they didn't. They never signed your invisible contract. They're simply playing their own game, completely unaware that you expected them to dance to yours. And when they don't, when they lie, forget, interrupt, disappoint, we feel offended, as though the universe itself has made some terrible mistake. Yet it hasn't. That's just the mind insisting they shouldn't be like that. But they are. Expecting people to act like you is like expecting the cat to bark because you're in the mood for a dog. When you give up demanding harmony from the world, you begin to laugh at how seriously you once took everyone else's behavior. And laughter, you see, is the sound of freedom returning. Once you stop expecting people to behave like you, another realization quietly dawns. You also stop needing them to agree with you. Because disagreement, you see, is just diversity in disguise. The same life that makes trees grow crooked makes minds grow in different directions. It's rather silly to demand that everyone see through your eyes when their windows open onto entirely different skies. And that's where most of our suffering begins. Not in what people do, but in our desperate urge to make them see it our way. So before we can ever find peace with others, we must loosen our grip on this idea of being right, this little badge we polish and wear upon the chest of me. We are terribly concerned, you know, with being right. It's one of our favorite addictions, the sweet intoxication of certainty. We argue, we defend, all to protect this fragile little castle called my opinion. But what if being right isn't the point at all? What if life isn't a debate to be won, but a dance to be enjoyed? Because notice, every time you must be right, someone else must be wrong. And so the world divides itself neatly into enemies and fools, all invented by your need to feel secure. The truth doesn't belong to anyone. It plays hide and seek through all of us. And the moment you stop chasing it, it comes and sits quietly beside you. When you drop the obsession with being right, you begin to listen, not to prepare a counter-argument, but to truly hear. You find that peace isn't born from victory. It comes when there's no longer anything to defend. So let others cling to their certainties. Let them win, because the one who no longer needs to win has already found the only thing worth keeping. It's peace. And when you no longer need to be right, you'll notice something quite extraordinary. Other people's opinions begin to lose their gravity. For so long, our sense of being right was tied to our sense of being somebody. And when that somebody feels threatened, even the gentlest disagreement sounds like thunder. But once you stop defending an image of yourself, the thunder becomes only noise, and the sky remains perfectly clear. You realize that what people say about you is simply an echo of their own mind, a reflection bouncing off their own glass. If you mistake that reflection for your face, you will spend your life trying to polish someone else's mirror. It's rather curious how much power we give to sound. Someone utters a few vibrations through the air, a sentence, a label, a careless remark, and suddenly your entire sense of self begins to tremble. You take their words, wear them like tattoos, and then wonder why you feel marked. But tell me, what exactly is being wounded? The sound passes, the air settles, and all that remains is your idea of what it meant. You see, the insult doesn't live in their mouth. It lives in your memory. When someone says you're foolish, that statement doesn't describe you. It describes their vision, their mood, their moment. Why let their passing weather become your climate? To depend on another's praise or blame is to hang your heart on a wind chime. Every breeze becomes a storm. Freedom begins when you realize that nothing anyone says about you has anything to do with who you actually are. Because who you are is not an opinion. It's the silence before every word. And silence, thank God, cannot be offended. Now, this doesn't mean you must let everyone trample through your garden while you sit smiling in eternal bliss. No, no. Love without intelligence becomes sentimentality, and peace without clarity becomes passivity. You see, protecting your energy isn't about building walls. It's about knowing where your garden ends and the wild forest begins. You can welcome visitors, but you needn't let them pitch a tent on your soul. Most people confuse kindness with compliance. They think to be spiritual is to say yes to everything, to be endlessly available, endlessly forgiving, endlessly exhausted. But even the sun sets, and even the ocean withdraws from the shore. Boundaries are not barriers. They are expressions of balance. When you say no, you're not rejecting the other. You're honoring the rhythm of your own being. Because if you give when you're empty, you offer not love, but resentment dressed as virtue. It's a funny thing. When you finally stop overextending yourself, you discover that life doesn't fall apart. It simply rearranges itself around your peace. And peace, unlike exhaustion, doesn't need to be earned. So, protect your energy not by closing the heart, but by staying rooted in yourself. Like a tree that bends with the wind but never forgets where it stands. When you no longer feel the need to defend an image, you find that silence begins to speak for you. It's not the silence of avoidance or repression. It's the silence that comes when there's simply nothing left to say. Most people imagine strength as volume, as assertion, as a firm voice that must be heard. But Real strength often sounds like nothing at all, because truth doesn't argue, it just is. When someone throws anger at you, what happens if you don't throw it back? It falls to the ground like a stone that has lost its target. And in that quiet, something extraordinary occurs. Their fury begins to echo only in their own mind, while yours remains still, like a pond untouched by the wind. You see, silence is not a retreat. It's a refusal to participate in madness. It's not submission. It's sovereignty. It's saying without words, I will not be drafted into your war. When you stop reacting, the world reveals its true pace. Slow, rhythmic, almost musical. You find that you don't have to win arguments or prove points. You simply have to be still enough to hear life humming beneath the noise. And that hum, that quiet background of existence, is what people spend lifetimes chasing without realizing it has been humming through them all along. When you no longer rush to defend or explain, you begin to see something very curious about other people. They are mirrors, not obstacles. Every irritation, every insult, every criticism, it's life holding up a reflection of your own unfinished business. That's why certain remarks sting, while others pass like wind. The sting only finds what's already tender. So rather than blaming the messenger, look at what they've touched. You may find that the world isn't against you at all. It's simply showing you where you still hold resistance. The people who bother you the most are often your best teachers in disguise. They reveal the exact place where you're not yet free. And once you see this, you stop taking things so personally. The moment someone tries to provoke you, you almost want to thank them. Not because you enjoy the jab, but because they've helped you spot another knot you can now untie. That's the secret. People lose their power to bother you. The instant you realize they were never enemies, only mirrors polishing you back to clarity. And once you begin to see others as mirrors, something softer begins to unfold. You stop needing the reflection altogether. You no longer cling to the role of the one who must learn, or the one who must be calm, or even the one who must not be bothered, because all of those are still little masks, still the self trying to fix itself. Letting go isn't something you do. It's what happens when you stop holding on. Just as the hand releases a stone when it grows tired of grasping, the heart releases its burdens when it grows tired of pretending to control. You see, anger, resentment, and hurt, they're just the mind's way of saying, I haven't yet accepted what already is. But when you finally see the futility of resistance, when you stop demanding life to be polite, it becomes beautifully simple. People say what they say. The world moves as it moves. And you remain undisturbed, like the sky behind all weather. To let go is not to forget, nor to forgive in any official sense. It's to wake up and realize there's nothing to forgive, because there was never anyone separate to offend. The play goes on, the actors shout their lines, and you, at last, can sit in the audience, smiling, knowing it was all theater from the beginning. And in that smile, you discover the secret you were chasing all along. Nothing and no one can bother you. When you've stopped mistaking the play for real life,
it is a most peculiar thing, you see, that a human being can spend an entire lifetime searching for themselves while never realizing they were never truly lost. And yet that is the great game we are all playing, the cosmic game of hide and seek. The universe pretending not to be itself, wandering through space and time in the disguise of you and me. Now, somewhere along the way, we forgot this game. We began to take the disguise rather seriously. We began to believe that this mask we wear, this name, this history, this bundle of memories was who we really are. And so the play became a tragedy. Because when the actor forgets he's in a play, the suffering feels very real indeed. But let us begin at the beginning, if such a thing can be said to exist. Imagine, if you will, the moment you were born, not the event itself, but the sense of entering a world that was already in motion. Nobody asked you if you wished to be here. You arrived as a mystery, blinking into a mystery. And the first thing you learned, almost immediately, was that you were something separate. The doctor said, "It's a boy," or "It's a girl." Someone gave you a name. Someone said, "This is you." And in that instant, the great forgetting began. You see, the child does not know that there is a line between itself and the world. When a baby cries, it believes the universe is crying. When it laughs, it believes the whole sky is laughing with it. But very soon, we are taught otherwise. We are told where we end and where everything else begins. That's the first illusion, that there is an inside and an outside, that you are here and the world is there. We even speak of it that way. I came into this world. But that's not how it happened at all. You did not come into this world. You came out of it in precisely the same way a wave comes out of the ocean or a leaf grows out of a tree. You are not a stranger here. You are the universe expressing itself as this particular form for a while. And yet, because of language, because of conditioning, because of fear, we begin to imagine ourselves as isolated fragments. We identify with the body, with the name, with the narrative. And we say, "I am this," and nothing more. But tell me, where exactly does this I begin? If I draw a line around your body, is that truly the border of you? Because the air you breathe becomes your blood, and your blood becomes your thought, and your thought changes the world around you. So where do you stop and the world begin? It's quite impossible to say, isn't it? The whole thing is one continuous process, yet our minds have divided it up for convenience. We draw lines, make maps, categorize, define. But the map, you see, is never the territory. The word is never the thing. The idea of you is not you. And yet, we have mistaken the symbol for the reality. This is why people suffer. Because we have been hypnotized by words, by images, by the great myth of separateness. The ancient Hindus called this Maya, the illusion that tricks consciousness into believing it is something apart from itself. And from this illusion springs all the great human dramas: fear, greed, ambition, loneliness, the endless craving to become something more. When you think you are a separate being, the universe becomes a threat. Everything outside is either something to be conquered or something to be avoided. You must protect yourself. You must compete. You must achieve. And so you spend your life struggling to survive, never realizing that the very energy of that struggle is the same energy that moves the stars. It is rather like a wave on the ocean trying not to be wet. The wave says, "I must maintain my shape, my identity. I must fight against all the other waves." And in doing so, it forgets that it is the ocean itself. You and I are doing exactly that. We have become obsessed with being somebody rather than simply being. Now, this forgetting is not a mistake. It's part of the game. The universe hides itself from itself so that it can experience the joy of rediscovery. The darkness is necessary for light to recognize itself. The silence gives meaning to sound. And in the same way, Forgetting who you are is the prelude to awakening. But the tragedy of our modern life is that we've made the forgetting permanent. We have built entire civilizations around the idea of separation. We have systems that reward competition and punish stillness. We have machines that amplify distraction. We measure worth in numbers, and we mistake productivity for purpose. And so, the game has lost its laughter, the play has forgotten its script. You can see this in the way people live. They move as if haunted, always chasing, always becoming, never arriving. They think salvation lies in the next promotion, the next purchase, the next achievement. But every time they reach the next thing, it dissolves like mist, because what they are truly searching for cannot be owned, cannot be earned, cannot even be found. It can only be remembered. And so the question arises, who or what is it that has forgotten? Who is this I that believes it is lost? If you look closely, you'll find something extraordinary. You'll find that the one who seeks is the very thing being sought. You'll find that beneath all the noise and confusion, there is a silence watching everything. That silence is what you truly are. When you close your eyes at night and the whole world disappears, that silence remains. When your thoughts fade for a brief moment, something is still there, isn't it? The awareness that notices the absence of thought, that's you. Not the story, not the name, not the body, the awareness itself, that which never comes and never goes. But we are so accustomed to looking outward that we miss it. We keep expecting truth to appear in some grand revelation when it has been quietly humming beneath everything all along. Like a song that never ends, only changes its tune. And so, to remember who you are is not to add something new. It is to remove what was never real. It is to peel away the layers of conditioning, fear, and pretense until only the simple fact of being remains. That is where the journey truly begins, not in acquiring, but in noticing. Not in striving, but in seeing clearly. You cannot become yourself because you already are. You can only wake up to that fact. And when you do, life begins to feel less like a prison and more like a play. The actors are the same, the scenery unchanged, but suddenly the story is light again. The laughter returns. The wave remembers it is the ocean. That is the beginning of remembering. That is the end of the dream of separation. When you awaken, even for a moment, to the truth of what you are, something remarkable happens. The world does not change, and yet it is utterly transformed. The same faces pass by, the same routines unfold, but there is a new quality to it all, a kind of luminous playfulness, as if the universe has been holding its breath, waiting for you to notice the joke. But it doesn't end there, because the moment we catch a glimpse of truth, the mind rushes in to claim it. It says, "Ah, I understand now. I've figured it out." And that, you see, is the second forgetting. The ego, clever as ever, puts on spiritual clothing and pretends to have seen the light. It becomes the seeker who has found. But remember, the moment you think you've captured truth, you've already lost it. Truth cannot be caught because it is what is doing the catching. It's a very curious situation. The more earnestly you pursue enlightenment, the more it recedes from you. Like chasing your own shadow, the harder you try, the further it slips away. Because you are what you seek. You are the awareness that is looking. And so, to look for yourself is a kind of cosmic comedy. The eye cannot see itself directly, only by reflection. This is why so many spiritual traditions emphasize stillness. Not stillness as in rigid quietness, but the stillness of understanding that there's nowhere to go, that the very act of seeking keeps the illusion alive. To sit quietly and observe is to see that the one doing the seeking is made of the same stuff as the sky, as the wind, as the stars. But here's where the pretending comes in. Even after this realization, life continues. You still have to eat, work, speak, love, and lose. You still stub your toe. You still get caught in emotion. You still wake up in the middle of the night wondering what it all means. The difference is subtle but profound. You now know it's a play. You still act your part, but you no longer mistake the mask for the face. You see, life is not something you overcome. It's something you dance with. The waves do not resist the tide. They move in harmony with it. So, too, does the awakened person move with life, not against it, not above it, but with it. To live this way is to rediscover innocence. A childlike wonder returns, not because you are naive, but because you are no longer cynical. You begin to see that everything is part of the same unfolding. The pain, the joy, the confusion, even the boredom, all of it belongs. All of it is the universe pretending to be separate, pretending to forget, so it can rediscover itself anew. But beware, the mind loves to make a project out of awakening. It says, now I must maintain my spiritual state, I must be mindful all the time. And so it creates yet another identity, the enlightened self. But that too is part of the game. The pretending continues, only now it's cloaked in holiness. The only way out is to see that there is no way out. You cannot escape the play because you are the play. You cannot stop pretending because pretending is part of what you are. The trick, then, is not to end the pretending, but to enjoy it, to see through it without denying it, to laugh at the cosmic joke rather than trying to explain it. Think of life as a grand symphony. Each note, each instrument has its place. Some play melodies, others dissonance. But the beauty lies in the whole, not in any single part. You are both the music and the musician, the listener and the sound. And to live with that awareness is to move through life with a certain grace, not the stiff grace of discipline, but the flowing grace of trust. Trust is the highest form of intelligence. It's not blind belief, it's participation. It's saying yes to the unknown. It's stepping into the rhythm without needing to know the choreography. Because when you trust the flow of life, you find it carries you exactly where you need to be. This doesn't mean you never fall. Of course you fall. But now you understand that even falling is part of the dance. You understand that pain is not punishment, it's the universe moving through you, rearranging, refining, renewing. Every tear, every stumble is another reminder that you are alive. And perhaps that's what we forget most easily, that to be alive is not to be perfect, but to participate. The stars burn and collapse, the trees grow and decay, everything changes, and that change is not a flaw, it's the very expression of beauty. In the end, awakening is not about rising above life, but sinking fully into it. It's not about being calm all the time, but about being real all the time. It's about allowing the whole spectrum of existence to play through you, the laughter, the fear, the tenderness, the confusion, and recognizing that you are not any single note, but the silence from which all of them arise. And so, when you remember who you are, you don't vanish into some mystical void. You re-enter the world with open eyes. You smile at the absurdity of it all. You forgive more easily. You laugh more deeply. You become softer, not weaker. Wiser, not detached. You realize that love is not a feeling, but a way of seeing. You begin to recognize yourself everywhere, in the eyes of a stranger, in the sound of the rain, in the passing wind, because how could you not? The one who once believed they were lost now sees that there was nowhere to go. The one who searched the stars now sees that the light was always within. The pretending continues. But now it is joyful. You play your part beautifully because you know it's a part. You cry when the story calls for tears, and you laugh when the scene becomes absurd. And when the curtain falls, you bow not in defeat, but in gratitude. For you have remembered the secret. The universe keeps whispering that it was you all along. And so, the remembering deepens. For what begins as a glimpse slowly ripens into a way of being, a quiet knowing that hums beneath everything you do. You still move through the world as a person, with a name and a story, but something within you no longer clings so tightly to that story. You wear it lightly now, as you would a costume at a festival. You play your part with sincerity, but you no longer mistake it for who you truly are. This is where the real transformation begins, not in grand revelations or supernatural moments, but in the smallest, most ordinary acts. Making tea, walking through the rain, waiting at a stoplight. You start to notice how extraordinary the ordinary really is. The smell of earth after a storm, the texture of a wooden table beneath your hand, the faint echo of laughter drifting through a window. You begin to live with an intimacy that no philosophy can capture. This is what the mystics mean when they speak of heaven on earth. It is not a place elsewhere. It is this very life, seen clearly, without the veil of judgment or expectation. To live this way is to rediscover wonder. You see that everything, absolutely everything, is sacred because it exists. Even your own confusion, your sorrow, your restlessness, these too are part of the divine dance. But the mind, ever restless, will still try to intervene. It whispers that such peace cannot last, that surely this stillness will vanish. It begins to search for ways to hold on to the state of grace, to capture it like a photograph. Yet every attempt to hold on to stillness destroys it. For stillness is not something to be kept. It is what remains when there is no grasping. And so, you learn to let go again, not as a lesson, but as a rhythm. Letting go becomes breathing. Each inhale takes in the world, and each exhale releases your need to possess it. Life flows through you rather than around you. You realize there was never a separation to begin with, only the illusion of one. In this stage of awakening, something else happens. You begin to see that others, too, are pretending to be separate. Every stranger becomes a mirror, every argument a lesson, every act of cruelty a cry for recognition. You begin to sense the shared ache of humanity, the longing to return home to something that was never lost. This understanding births compassion, not as an effort, but as a natural response. You see yourself in others because you finally see others as yourself. Now, compassion is often misunderstood. It is not pity, nor is it a soft sentiment. True compassion carries clarity. It does not enable illusions, but gently reveals them. When you act from compassion, you do not seek to fix anyone. You simply offer presence, a quiet reminder that they, too, are enough. And that, you see, is often the greatest healing of all, to be reminded that nothing is missing. This realization begins to dissolve fear. Fear thrives on separation. It feeds on the illusion that there is something outside you that can destroy what you are. But when you see that life and death, gain and loss, are movements of the same ocean, what is there to fear? The wave cannot fall out of the sea. It may rise and fall, but it never ceases to be water. Imagine for a moment a leaf floating down a stream. The leaf does not resist the current. It does not complain about where it is taken. It moves gracefully, not because it understands the river's path, but because it trusts the flow. You, too, can live this way. You can let yourself be carried, not by resignation, but by participation. You move with life instead of against it, and in doing so, discover that the current was never against you. As this understanding deepens, even suffering begins to look different. You stop asking, why me? And begin to wonder, what is this showing me? The pain doesn't vanish, but its meaning changes. It becomes a teacher, not an enemy. It softens the edges of the self, humbles the ego, opens the heart. You begin to see that the cracks are not signs of failure. They are the spaces through which the light enters. In time, even the idea of awakening fades. You no longer measure yourself against spiritual ideals or compare your progress to anyone else's. You simply live. You laugh when it's funny. You cry when it hurts. You fall. You rise. You begin again. You stop trying to be spiritual and start being human, which, ironically, is the most spiritual thing of all. The sages were never superhuman beings. They simply stopped pretending to be anything else. They embraced their humanity so fully that it became transparent, allowing the infinite to shine through it. To live like this is to understand that divinity is not somewhere else, waiting to be reached. It's here, looking out from behind your eyes, breathing through your lungs, pulsing in your veins. This is the quiet revolution of awareness. It doesn't announce itself with thunder or revelation. It arrives gently, like dawn through a half-open window. It changes everything by changing nothing, for it reveals that nothing needed changing. The self you were trying to fix was never broken. The world you were trying to save was never lost. To see this clearly is to rest at last. Not the rest of exhaustion, but the rest of arrival. You realize you've been home all along. Every detour, every mistake, every heartbreak was part of the journey back to what never moved. You laugh softly at the irony of it all, and in that laughter, a great peace arises. It's not the peace of escape, but the peace of inclusion. You can finally say yes to all of it, the confusion, the clarity, the birth, the death, the gain, the loss. You see that life's perfection is not in its smoothness, but in its completeness. It holds everything, and that wholeness is love. And so, you walk differently now. You no longer rush. You no longer grasp. You no longer wait for permission to be alive. You move through the world as a presence rather than a person, as an awareness rather than a role. And wherever you go, something silent and beautiful goes with you, reminding all who meet you that they, too, have never been lost. And then there comes a kind of quiet after the knowing. Not the quiet of emptiness, but of fullness, as though life has finally exhaled and found itself resting in its own rhythm. You wake one morning and realize there is nothing left to search for. The seeking, the striving, even the idea of becoming someone better dissolves like mist in sunlight. You see, the moment you stop trying to arrive anywhere, you discover that you have always been here. This is the final unfolding of the journey, not a destination, but an absorption. The wave returns to the ocean, not by effort, but by remembering it was never apart. You, too, begin to live with that same natural ease. You no longer ask life for meaning, because you have become meaning itself. Everything you touch, everything you see, reflects the same still intelligence that lives within you. You start to laugh at the absurdity of the game we all play, the endless chase for validation, the frantic pursuit of success, the anxious clinging to permanence. You see it now as a cosmic dance, a play where the actors have simply forgotten it's a play. And rather than feeling superior or detached, you feel tenderness, because you remember what it was like to be caught in the script, to take every line so seriously. Compassion deepens, not as a virtue, but as understanding. You begin to notice that the boundaries between you and life are melting. The wind moves, and it feels like your breath. The rain falls, and it feels like your tears. Someone smiles on the street, and it feels like your own joy shining back at you. It's as if the whole world has turned into a mirror, reflecting only one truth. There was never two. And what becomes of fear in such a place? It loses its hold. Not because you have conquered it, but because you see through it. You see that fear was always a shadow cast by your forgetting. When you remember who you are, fear has nothing left to cling to. You realize that the great mystery of life has never been against you. It was only waiting for your cooperation. This doesn't make you invincible or indifferent. You still feel pain. You still grieve, you still stumble, but now there's a softness around it all, a kind of quiet trust that runs through every experience. You understand that sorrow and joy are not opposites, but two notes in the same song. You don't try to hold one or escape the other. You let them both play through you. And in that harmony, something timeless begins to hum. You realize that even death, that great unspoken fear, is not an ending but a rhythm, a return. It's the breath of the cosmos inhaling again. What you truly are cannot die because it was never born. It only takes form for a little while, to taste itself, to play. And when the play ends, it bows and becomes the stage once more. This understanding doesn't make you distant from the world. Quite the opposite. It draws you closer. You love more deeply, laugh more freely, forgive more easily. You no longer need to protect yourself from life, because you have recognized that you are life. Every moment becomes a prayer without words, an act of worship without worshippers. It's funny how we spend so much of our lives trying to control what was never ours. We fight the current, build walls, wear masks, and then one day you realize you don't have to do any of that anymore. You can let the river carry you. You can let the walls fall. You can let the masks drop. You can finally breathe. And in that breath, the world breathes with you. The trees sway in rhythm. The birds call in response. Even the silence feels alive. You begin to feel a subtle joy that asks for nothing, that depends on nothing. It's the joy of simply being. The kind of peace that doesn't need to be protected because it cannot be taken away. You look back at your life, all the mistakes, the detours, the heartbreaks, and you see the hidden intelligence woven through it all. Every fall was a doorway. Every delay, a redirection. Every ending, a beginning in disguise. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was wrong. It was all part of the unfolding, the remembering. And as you sit quietly, watching the sun dip below the horizon, you feel no need to hold on to it, no sorrow that it's fading, because you know it will rise again. Not because of belief, but because of rhythm. The same rhythm that moves your breath, that beats your heart, that carries the tides of the sea and the stories of your life. To live this way is not to transcend the human experience, but to be fully immersed in it without being consumed by it. You can taste the salt of tears and still smile. You can watch the seasons change without wishing them to stay. You can love without fear of loss, because you understand that love itself never leaves, only its forms change. This is what it means to awaken. Not to escape the dream, but to dream consciously. To know you are both the dreamer and the dream. You live in the world, but you are no longer bound by it. You participate in the drama, but you no longer mistake the stage for reality. You have come home to yourself, and in doing so, you have come home to the universe. And perhaps that's the most beautiful realization of all, that you were never lost, never broken, never unworthy. You were simply playing hide and seek with eternity, waiting for the moment when you'd stop searching and start seeing. Now you see. And seeing, you smile. Because the great secret, the one that sages have whispered through time, is beautifully simple. You are already what you seek. So you walk on, not to arrive, but to express, not to find meaning, but to reveal it. And as you walk, the universe walks with you, endlessly unfolding, endlessly returning, endlessly free. There are moments in life when words strike us with an almost eerie precision, as if they were spoken directly to us and no one else. You may have passed over the very same words before, perhaps even laughed at them or found them unremarkable. And yet suddenly, in the middle of your own struggles, they arrive with such clarity and such force that they feel destined, inevitable, as though the universe itself has conspired to deliver them into your hands. This is the mystery of timing, the way a message finds you not when you demand it, but when you are prepared to receive it. We often imagine that wisdom can be gathered like coins, that if we read enough, listen enough, think enough, we will finally hold it in our grasp. But real wisdom is slippery. It is not simply a collection of ideas to be memorized and filed away. It is a recognition, a shift of perspective, a kind of remembering of what you have always known deep down. And recognition cannot be forced. You may search feverishly, read endlessly, strain with every ounce of effort, but nothing happens until the moment ripens. Like fruit that will not sweeten before its season, wisdom will not open until you are ready. Consider how often this has been true in your own life. Perhaps someone once told you something you dismissed outright, only to find years later that the very same words became the key to your freedom. Or perhaps a book sat on your shelf, forgotten, until one day you picked it up and suddenly every page seemed to speak directly to your heart. The words did not change, you did. Your life unfolded through joys and sorrows, through mistakes and triumphs, and at last you arrived at the moment when those words could land. The message was waiting all along, but you had to live enough to hear it. This is why the message you are hearing now feels as though it was meant for you. Not because someone has tailored it, not because fate has singled you out, but because your life has ripened to the point where it resonates. It is not so much that the message found you, but that you grew into it. And in that growing, the meeting feels inevitable. Just as the river winding through valleys seems destined to meet the sea, so your path has brought you to this very moment where these words and your awareness converge. We do not like to think of life this way because it challenges the notion that we are in complete control. We imagine that we chart our own course, that growth is something we can schedule and demand. But notice how your greatest realizations have come to you. Did they not often arrive unexpectedly, as gifts you could not have summoned? The most profound lessons tend to come uninvited, often in moments of despair or confusion, when you were forced to drop your defenses and listen with a new kind of openness. It is not that suffering is desirable, but that it humbles us, softens us, makes us porous enough for wisdom to enter. Think of the way the earth must be prepared before seeds will grow. The soil must be turned, the weeds cleared, the rains must fall. Only then will the seed sprout, not because the seed has changed, but because the conditions have aligned. And so it is with the messages of life. They lie dormant around us, unnoticed, until at last the conditions within us are ready. Then, what was once meaningless bursts into significance, as though it had been waiting patiently for this exact moment. And so it may be with the message you are hearing now. You could have heard these very same words years ago and felt nothing. You could hear them again years from now and feel something entirely different. But here, now, they strike with the peculiar force of inevitability. They belong to this moment because you belong to this moment, and the two are not separate. You and the message are the same wave rising in the same ocean, cresting together, inseparable. It is tempting to call this fate, or destiny, or divine guidance. And indeed, those are names we give to this uncanny harmony between inner need and outer event. But the deeper truth is simpler. Life is whole. You and the words you hear are not two independent things colliding by chance. They are expressions of the same unfolding, the same awareness manifesting as thought, as sound, as recognition. The timing feels mysterious because you do not see the whole pattern. You see only the fragment, the meeting point, not the vast web of conditions that made it possible. But if you could see it all, you would know that it could not have been otherwise. When you look back upon your life, you may notice how many such moments have shaped you. The chance encounter that changed your direction, the unexpected failure that opened a new path, the heartbreak that taught you compassion. At the time, these events seemed random, even cruel, and yet, later, you may recognize them as the very ground from which growth arose. The teaching was there, embedded in the experience, waiting until you were ready to see. The message is not separate from the life that carries it. Life itself is the teacher, and every moment is a lesson. So when a message arrives that feels meant for you, do not cling to it as though it were a rare jewel to be hoarded. Instead, see it as the echo of your own awareness, calling back to remind you of what you already are. The truth of who you are cannot be given to you, for you already possess it. What the words provide is only a mirror, a reflection that allows you to see more clearly. The resonance you feel is the sound of your own being, recognized at last. This is why the message feels alive. It is not information, it is transformation. It does not merely add to your store of knowledge, but reorients your vision, turning you toward yourself. And when you feel it strike, it is because the timing is perfect, because the whole of your life has prepared you for this recognition. Nothing has been wasted, not the failures, not the doubts, not the fears. Each has played its part in bringing you here to this exact moment where the message you were meant to hear becomes audible at last. The curious thing about messages is that they are never truly finished. Even when a sentence ends, the silence that follows carries its own meaning, and when a lecture concludes, the words continue to echo in the chambers of the mind, reshaping themselves into new insights long after the voice has faded. A message that finds you is not confined to the moment of hearing. It lingers, germinates, grows. You may walk away believing you have understood, only to discover days later that the understanding has deepened, that the words have taken root in some hidden part of you. This is why we must be careful not to treat wisdom as though it were a possession, a jewel to be locked away in a cabinet. Wisdom is alive, and to treat it as a possession is to kill it. What was once vibrant becomes brittle, what was once fluid becomes rigid, and so, to keep wisdom alive, we must return to it again and again, not with the expectation of hearing something new, but with the openness to hear it differently. The words may not change, but you will, and each encounter will reveal something fresh. Think of it like returning to a river. You may step into the same stream again and again, but it is never the same water that touches your skin. The current moves on, new waters flow in, and so each visit is both familiar and entirely new. So it is with the teachings that move us. Each time you hear them, you are not the same person you were before, and so they strike you differently. They find you again at a new depth, in a new season of life, and the resonance continues. The greatest danger is to assume that once you have heard a message, you have exhausted its meaning. This is the arrogance of the mind, which seeks to categorize and conclude, to say, I know that already. But the most profound truths are not things you know once and for all. They are things you live moment by moment, again and again. To say, I know that I am not separate from the world, is not the same as living with the felt reality of inseparability. To say, I know that all things change, is not the same as flowing with change in the midst of loss. Knowledge can be stored away, but wisdom must be renewed in each breath. This is why the message you were meant to hear does not end with the hearing. It continues as a practice, as a way of being. It whispers in the quiet choices you make, in the way you respond to frustration, in the way you soften toward yourself and others. It is not a grand revelation to be remembered, but a gentle rhythm to be lived. So let us return to the question, why does the message arrive when it does? Why not sooner? Why not later? To answer this, we must look closely at the nature of readiness. We often think of readiness as something we can control, as though we could prepare ourselves perfectly for wisdom to enter. But readiness is not an achievement, it is a surrender. It is not that you make yourself ready, but that life wears you down until you can no longer cling to your defenses. Readiness is the collapse of resistance, the softening of the shell, the moment when you can no longer maintain the illusion of control. Think of the way a seed must crack open before it can grow. To the seed, the cracking may feel like destruction, like death, but in truth, it is the beginning of life. So too with us. Our moments of breaking are often the moments of greatest possibility. What feels like the end is often the opening, the place where light enters. And it is in those moments that the message finds us, not because it was absent before, but because we are finally porous enough to receive it. This is why suffering, though painful, often becomes the soil of transformation. It is not that suffering is inherently good or desirable, but that it dissolves the rigid certainties we cling to. It humbles the mind that believes it has everything figured out. It softens the heart that has grown hard with pride or fear. And in that softening, the message can enter not as a doctrine imposed from outside, but as a truth recognized from within. Yet there is another side to this. For just as suffering can prepare the ground, so too can joy. There are times when beauty itself is the message, when a sunset leaves you breathless, when music draws tears from your eyes, when laughter reminds you that life is worth living. In those moments, too, the message arrives, not in words, but in presence. The teaching is not always a correction. Sometimes it is an affirmation, a reminder that the world is already whole, that you are already included, that nothing is missing. And so the message is not bound to a single form. It may come as a lecture, a book, a conversation with a friend. It may come as silence, as nature, as the simple act of breathing. To look for it only in one form is to miss its endless variety. The message is life itself, unfolding in countless guises, always speaking, always available, but only heard when the ear is open. Now consider this. If the message always comes when we are ready, then perhaps every message you have ever heard was the right one at the right time, even if you did not recognize it as such. Perhaps even the words you rejected, the teachings you mocked, the advice you ignored, played their part. They planted seeds that lay dormant until the season was right. And even your resistance was part of the process, for it shaped the path that brought you to where you are now. This means that nothing is wasted. No conversation, no book, no experience lies outside the web of meaning. Even what seems irrelevant or mistaken may reveal itself later as essential. The fragments fit together in ways you cannot see, and only in hindsight do you realize that each played its part. So too with this message. You may not grasp it fully now, but perhaps later it will blossom, and you will look back with gratitude that it was waiting for you here. But there is an even deeper implication. If the message finds you when you most need it, then you too may become the bearer of a message for someone else. Not because you have all the answers, not because you must preach or persuade, but because simply by living, you become part of the pattern. A word spoken in kindness, a gesture of understanding, a moment of honesty, these two can arrive with uncanny timing for another. You may never know it, but your life may be the message that someone else most needs to hear. This is why it is important not to underestimate the power of presence. You do not have to contrive grand teachings or prepare elaborate speeches. Sometimes your simple being, your willingness to show up authentically, carries more weight than any doctrine. For presence itself is the message that life is whole, that awareness is enough, that nothing is missing. And so we return to the heart of the matter. The message you were meant to hear is not a secret code hidden away in distant texts. It is the ongoing revelation of life itself, unfolding in this moment. As you listen, as you breathe. The timing feels uncanny because you are beginning to notice the harmony that has always been there, the inseparability of inner and outer, of self and world. The message is not separate from you. You are the message, embodied, enacted, spoken in every gesture. To realize this is to find a profound peace. For then you no longer chase desperately after answers, as though they were hiding somewhere beyond your reach. You see instead that the answers arise with the questions, that the teaching and the student are not two. You see that life itself is the teacher, and you are both the listener and the voice. And in that recognition, the urgency drops away. You can rest, knowing that nothing is missing, that what you need will find you when you are ready. So, perhaps the greatest message of all is this: trust the unfolding. Do not rush, do not grasp, do not despair. The words you need, the experiences you need, the lessons you need, they're all woven into the fabric of life, and they will appear at the moment when they can be received. Trust that timing, for it is wiser than your plans. Trust that pattern, for it holds you even when you cannot see it. Trust that life, for it has carried you here to this moment, where the message you were meant to hear has found you at last. Most of us live under an unspoken law: always be available. It begins early. A child is taught to answer immediately when his name is called. At school, an absent response is punished. In the workplace, we are told to keep our phones nearby, our inboxes open, our minds alert, just in case someone needs us. Availability is rewarded, praised, demanded, and so we grow into adults who confuse availability with goodness. We believe that saying yes makes us virtuous, that answering quickly makes us reliable, that bending ourselves for others makes us lovable. But in truth, constant availability is a kind of prison. A man who is always available to others becomes unavailable to himself. He is present everywhere and yet nowhere. Why do we equate availability with love? Because we are told that self-sacrifice is noble, that to be good is to give, and to give endlessly. And so we say yes. Yes to invitations we do not want. Yes to tasks that drain us. Yes to relationships that hollow us out. Our lives become a collection of other people's needs. We become like actors on a stage, performing roles assigned to us by family, friends, colleagues, strangers. We smile when we are tired. We nod when we disagree. We show up when our spirit longs to rest. But what kind of love is it if it demands that you betray yourself? The man who is always available pays a silent price. He loses the weight of his own presence. When he says yes to everything, his yes means nothing. His attention, scattered everywhere, becomes worthless. His presence, given away freely, becomes invisible. Consider water. When it overflows indiscriminately, flooding every place, it destroys. But when it is directed, when it flows through a channel, it nourishes. It becomes life itself. So too with your availability. Scattered everywhere, it is wasted. Given with discernment, it becomes sacred. And so one day, perhaps without even knowing why, a man decides not to answer. The phone rings, and he lets it ring. A request is made, and he says no. A demand is pressed, and he steps away. In that moment, he feels fear. For he has broken the law of availability. He has dared to say, I am not here for you right now. And immediately, the world reacts. Those who depended on his constant yes grow unsettled. They say, you've changed, you're selfish, you don't care anymore. But what do these accusations truly mean? They mean only this: you are no longer as useful to me as you once were. The shock of this realization cuts deep. He thought his presence was valued for who he was, but now he sees it was often valued for what he could give. When you stop being available, you hold up a mirror to others. You reveal who was with you for your essence and who was with you for your service. True companions remain. They do not vanish when you say no. They respect your boundaries, for they have boundaries of their own. They know that love is not measured in exhaustion, but in truth. False companions fall away. Their affection was never for you, but for your availability. And when your availability ends, so does their loyalty. This clarity is painful, but it is also liberating. For the man who loses false friends gains space for real ones. The first thing you notice when you stop being available is silence. At first, it feels like emptiness. The phone rings less. The requests stop. The invitations grow scarce. You feel abandoned, even punished. You wonder if you made a mistake, but slowly the silence changes. It becomes not emptiness, but presence. For the first time, you hear your own thoughts without interruption. For the first time, you feel the rhythm of your own breath, the pull of your own heart. And you begin to realize being unavailable to the world is not the same as being absent from life. On the contrary, it is the first step toward being truly present. By withdrawing, you become more real. The man who says yes to everything is never fully here. His mind is fractured into 1,000 obligations. His spirit is thin, stretched across the demands of others. He is always present and yet absent. The man who withdraws, who dares to say no, who refuses to be endlessly available, he becomes whole. He is less accessible, but more authentic. He is less frequent, but more meaningful. His presence, though rarer, carries weight. This is why stepping back feels heavy. It is the weight of reality pressing in, after years of dispersing yourself into illusions. But the world will not celebrate your withdrawal, for society thrives on availability. Employers want workers who never rest. Friends want companions who never decline. Families want members who never set boundaries. And so, when you withdraw, you become inconvenient. You disrupt the unwritten agreement that says, we will all pretend to be endlessly available so that no one has to face themselves. Your no exposes the lies in their yes. Your silence unsettles their noise. Your absence reveals the shallowness of their presence. And so they resist you. They call you cold, selfish, arrogant. But what they truly mean is, you no longer sacrifice yourself for my comfort. The early stages of withdrawal feel like exile. You walk alone, you question yourself, you wonder if you are becoming bitter, if you are making a mistake, but in truth, you are being initiated into a deeper life. The loneliness is not punishment, but purification. It strips away the crowd so that you may finally hear your own soul. And slowly, solitude reveals itself as something other than emptiness. It becomes a fullness, a companionship with life itself. The stars bear witness to you. The wind becomes your friend. The silence embraces you like an old companion. You begin to see that solitude is not absence of others, but presence of truth. So yes, when you stop being available, you carry a burden. You lose false friends. You face accusations. You endure silence. But this burden is also a gift. For in losing what was false, you gain what is real. In being accused of selfishness, you discover the difference between servitude and love. In embracing silence, you find presence. The weight of constant availability is the heaviest of all, for it is the weight of living for everyone but yourself. The burden of withdrawal is heavy too, but it is the weight of freedom. This is the beginning of the transformation, the first step on the path. The man who stops being available feels the sting of rejection, the ache of solitude, the discomfort of silence. But he also begins to feel something else, the stirring of authenticity, the slow awakening of presence, the whisper of freedom. It is not yet complete. The path is long and the burden still heavy. But the shift has begun, and once it begins, there is no turning back. When a man continues on the path of withdrawing his endless availability, something subtle begins to happen. At first it was only silence and loss, but slowly the silence becomes a sanctuary and the loss becomes a purification. He begins to see that his life was never meant to be a constant answering of demands, but a dance with reality itself. At the beginning, he thought that saying no was selfish. But over time, he sees that his no is not rejection, it is direction. It is the recognition that his energy is not infinite, and that to give it without care is to diminish its power. By saying no, he is not closing the door on others, he is opening the door to authenticity. And this shift changes everything. When he speaks now, his words carry weight, for they are not spoken out of obligation. When he shows up, his presence is felt more deeply, for it is not scattered across 100 places. His time is no longer an automatic offering, but a deliberate gift. The strange paradox is that by being less available, he becomes more present. Those who still walk with him notice this. They may not always like it, but they feel the difference. When he is there, he is truly there. When he listens, it is with the fullness of his being. When he gives, it is without resentment. And this, he realizes, is what love actually is, not the endless performance of availability, but the offering of one's whole self in truth. There is a certain peace that arises when you stop scattering yourself. You discover that you are no longer running, no longer rushing to keep up with the demands of everyone else's timetable. You learn that time itself begins to feel different when you are not filling it with obligations. Moments stretch, breaths deepen, the pace of life softens. You are no longer carried away by the current of endless yes. You begin to walk at the rhythm of your own soul. This is when the world around you changes. Some people will fade, unable to handle your boundaries. They will complain, accuse, distance themselves. And yet, you notice that others arrive. New companions who respect your space, who are not offended by your no, but grateful for your authenticity. Relationships built on illusion end, but relationships built on truth are born. In these relationships, you find freedom. You do not need to perform. You do not need to exhaust yourself to prove loyalty. You can disappear for a time, and they will not hold it against you. For they too have understood that love is not measured in constant availability, but in honest presence. Withdrawal also awakens a deeper awareness of life itself. When you are no longer always on call, you begin to hear the quieter voices of existence. The rustle of leaves becomes a conversation. The flow of a river becomes a teaching. The stars above you are no longer background decoration, but companions on the path. You realize that by becoming unavailable to the endless noise, you have become available to the eternal song. The irony is almost comic. All those years, you thought you were being good by being available, but in reality, you were absent from the one thing that truly matters, the mystery of being alive. In saying no to the world, you have said yes to life. And this yes cannot be faked. It carries a different vibration. People may not understand why they are drawn to you now, but they feel it. Your presence, no longer cheapened by endless accessibility, has become rare and therefore precious. Of course, there will still be moments of doubt, times when loneliness creeps in, times when the old habit of overgiving tries to return, but you have tasted the difference. You have felt the liberation of boundaries. And once you have seen the value of your own presence, you cannot go back to selling it cheaply. Some will still call you selfish. Some will insist you have grown cold. But within yourself, you know this is not true. You are not less loving, you are more. For your love is no longer diluted by resentment, no longer poisoned by exhaustion. Your love, though rarer, is whole. To live this way is to embrace a kind of nobility, not the nobility of pride or superiority, but the nobility of truth. It is to live without pretense, without performance. It is to know that your worth is not measured by how many demands you can meet, but by how authentically you can stand in the world as yourself. In this realization, life becomes lighter, not easier, for there will always be pressures and expectations, but lighter because you no longer carry the unnecessary weight of pleasing everyone. You carry only what is real, and in that reality, you discover strength. When you stop being available, everything changes. Not only because the world sees you differently, but because you see the world differently. You are no longer trapped in the endless cycle of obligation. You are no longer enslaved to the constant call of others. You have stepped into a deeper rhythm, one that aligns not with the noise of the crowd, but with the music of existence itself. And this, perhaps, is the greatest discovery, that availability, when given wisely, is not a duty but a gift. That your presence, when offered in truth, can touch others more deeply than 1,000 empty gestures. That by protecting your time, you honor the mystery of life. So let the world call you selfish. Let the crowd misunderstand. For in their misunderstanding, you are freed. You are no longer theirs to command. You belong only to life, to truth, to the great unfolding dance of being, and in that belonging, you find peace.